So yeah, I hope everybody has had some coffee or is having some coffee. It has been a long day and it's the last lecture, so it's a bit hard to stay awake. But yeah, hopefully I won't put you all to sleep. So recall from last time. So in the last lecture, what we did was we introduced this deformation theory problem of Mazur, that you given a profinite group and a representation rho bar from G to GLN of F. We wanted to study all its lift to all CNL WF algebras. All the CNL WF algebra just means quotient of power series rings over W of F. Now W of F is the ring of bit vectors. And we sort of ended with this theorem of Mazur, and we said that it was extended by Ramakrishna, which proved the existence of universal deformation ring and universal deformations. So let's recall the theorem once again for a convenience. So the theorem, so I'm saying Mazur and Ramakrishna because Ramakrishna sort of relaxed the hypothesis of absolute irreducibility a bit. So if rho bar is from G to GLNF is a representation such that the endomorphisms of rho bars is just scalars, it is satisfied by irreducible representations, but there is some more some reducible representations will also satisfy this. And G satisfies the finiteness condition phi p, that if you take any open subgroup of H, H of G, then it has only finitely many homomorphisms from H to Fp. If these two conditions are satisfied, then there exists a CNL WF algebra R rho bar univ and a lift rho univ of G to of rho bar, which goes from G to GLN of R rho bar univ, such that for any CNL WFF algebra R, the map from the homomorphisms from R rho bar univ to R to D rho bar of R, the set of deformations, which sends phi to the deformation corresponding to phi composed with rho univ, is a bijection. So this was like the main theorem. So R rho bar univ is called a universal deformation ring. Rho univ is called universal deformation. And what this is saying is that if you want to study all lifts of rho bar to any CNL WFF algebra R, you just need to know how this one ring R rho bar univ looks like and how this rho univ looks like. Once you know these two things, you know all lifts of rho bar to any CNL WF algebra R. So this was like the main theorem of Mazur and Ramakrishna. And we also said that the theorem is proved by verifying the conditions of Schlesinger's criteria. You can reformulate the statement of this theorem in terms of representability of some functors from the category of CNL WF algebras to the category of sets. And for that, Schlesinger has formulated some nice criteria. There are like four criteria, four conditions. And you need to check those four conditions. If those four conditions are satisfied, then the functor is representable. And that's how this theorem was proved by Mazur. So last time I mentioned what those four conditions were. And we also proved the first condition, very quickly. So the proofs of other three conditions, I'm not going to go over it. I have included them in slides. So if you go to the slides of lecture 2 on the ICTS webpage, you will see at the end that I verify all the four conditions of the criteria. So last time we only saw H1 and then there were like H2, H3, H4. I verify all of them. They are not hard verifications, just some routine checks, but I'm not going to go over them here because it will take a lot of time and it's not that illuminating. So but they are there in the slides of my second lecture. So you can just give it a look. I should mention that there is also an explicit construction of R rho bar univ. You don't have to go through this Schlesinger's criteria or anything. You can just explicitly construct this ring by hand and look at this article, Explicit Construction of Universal Deformation Rings by Desmet and Lenstra. It is from this book, Modular Form Fermat-Last Theorem. It's the famous conference that was held in Boston University in '95, I think. So the article there, it explains this construction. I mean, it's kind of, see, if you are only focused on getting a complete local ring which satisfies such properties, it's not hard, right? I mean, imagine your G to be a finite group, and then you can do an obvious construction to get this ring. For every element, you can introduce a matrix which has a polynomial variables as entries, and the relation between groups will give you the relation between this these matrix entries. So you have a quotient of polynomial ring, so that any homomorphism from G to GLNA for some ring A is given by a ring homomorphism from this ring R to A. So I'm going very quickly, but you can read it there. So for finite groups, producing such a ring is not hard at all. It's kind of the obvious thing that you do. And for profinite group, you can just take like you have the inverse limit of finite groups. You can produce this ring for every finite group, take an inverse limit. But the real challenge is to get a Noetherian, complete Noetherian local ring. You can get a complete local ring, but getting a complete Noetherian local ring requires some argument. So it's explained well in that article. You can look at it. So there is also an explicit way of doing these things, by hand. And nowadays, using pseudo characters and all, there are even cleaner proofs of this fact, of this explicit construction as well. But we will not go into it now. So the moral of the story was that there is this one ring R rho bar univ and this lift rho univ of your representation. Once we know both of them, we know any lift to any CNLWF algebra. So the natural question is, what can we say about this ring? To what extent can we go? So what we'll do today is try to explicitly determine this ring as much as possible, and we'll also see some examples where we can actually tell you what the ring is. So let's start. We start with the very basic, the very first case, that is the case of a character, which means one-dimensional representation. N is equal to 1. So then rho bar is just a character from G to F star. And because in character, the conjugacy classes are there's no conjugacy class, right? If you take a lift, any conjugate of that lift is the lift itself. So we don't have to worry about equivalence class or anything. We are just, we just study the lifts of a character to any CNLWF algebra. And as you can guess, it is very easy to see what the deformation ring will be. We will explain that now. So let chi bar be a character from G to F star, so just a homomorphism. Let GP be the pro-P completion of G. What does that mean? It means that GP is the inverse limit of G modulo N, where the inverse limit is taken over all closed normal subgroups N of G of finite index, such that G modulo N is a power of P. You just go modulo all the finite closed normal, the finite index closed normal subgroups, such that the index is a power of P. You take their inverse limit and you get the pro-P completion of G. And then we denote by GP ab the quotient of GP by the closure of its commutator subgroup. So it's like the continuous abelian quotient. You don't go modulo just the commutator, but the closure of its commutator. And because this finiteness condition that G satisfies phi p, it follows that GP ab is a finitely generated ZP module. Because there are only the condition phi p says that there are only finitely many homomorphisms from G to Fp. And any such homomorphism, it has to factor through this quotient, because you're mapping into a P group, which is abelian. So it has to factor through the pro-P completion, and it has to factor through its abelianization. So yeah, this is one remark that I should make, is that whenever you have a map from G to some pro-P group, it will factor through GP. You can just write it down by hand and you will see, because the image is a pro-P subgroup, and therefore it has to factor through the maximal pro-P completion of G. So that is GP. So that is the point of introducing this subgroup, this quotient GP. And FP is both P group and abelian. So therefore, any map from G to FP will factor through GPA, and therefore GPab is a finitely generated ZP module. Okay, and let WF completed GPab be the completed group ring of GPab over WF. And what is this? This is just the description that this completed group ring is the inverse limit of the usual group ring of GPab over H. And this GPab, the H varies over normal subgroups of GPab, which are of open normal subgroups, so they are of finite index. So basically, you have these finite groups, GPab modulo H. So you know how their group ring looks like. You take their inverse limit, you get the group ring of the completed group ring of GPab. It's easy to compute, right? If you know GPab, it's easy to compute this group ring. We'll see some examples where we can compute. Okay, so this is the setup I want to be in. And as I said, because GPab is finitely generated ZP algebra, this group ring is actually a CNLWF algebra. And as I said, we will see how this looks like. Now, I want to construct some character over this ring, which will be used in the main theorem. So let gamma from G to GPab be the natural projection. So it's just the natural quotient map. And if U is in GPab, then we denote by bracket U the corresponding element in the group ring. No, so in the completed group ring, this U will give some element of the group ring and will be denoted by bracket U. Okay, so we have a character eta naught from G to this to the multiplicative group of the completed group ring. It's we call it eta naught, and how is it described? It takes eta naught to be the bracket of gamma G. So gamma of G will give you something in GPF, and the bracket of that will give you something in the multiplicative group of your completed group ring. Okay, and we denote the Teichmuller lift of chi bar to the completed group ring by chi naught. So recall what I mean by Teichmuller group lift, Teichmuller lift. It's basically you have a character over F star, and you know there is a map from F star to W of F star, right? And because the roots of unity in F star, they are contained in W of F. So you get a map from the F star to W of F star, which is called the Teichmuller map. You compose chi bar with that and you get chi naught. So this is the Teichmuller lift. So under all this notation, what we have is that the universal deformation ring chi bar of this character chi bar, which is from G to F star, is the completed group ring of GPF over W of F. And moreover, the universal deformation of chi bar is given by chi naught times eta naught, where eta naught is this character, which takes G to bracket of gamma of G. So it takes G to its image in GPF first, and then to the element of the completed group ring described by this image. And chi naught is just the Teichmuller lift. So first of all, it's easy to verify that chi naught times eta naught is indeed a lift. And what we are saying is that it is actually the universal deformation.
Shaunak, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the deformation ring doesn't care about chi bar, is it?
Yeah, because this is one dimensional, it doesn't care about chi bar.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So basically so if we know how this abelianization of the Propy completion of G looks like, we know how the ring looks like, and we also know the character. So it's very, very explicit. The more you know, you only need to know about this abelianization of the Propy completion of G, and that's it. Proof is as I said, proof is not hard. Let's see. So suppose R is a CNLWF algebra, and we denote the Teichmuller lift of chi bar to R star by chi R. Again, this is the same thing, right? The Teichmuller lift is given by the same thing. You have a map, you have the Teichmuller character from F star to W of F star, and W of F R is a W of F algebra. So you have a map from W of F star to R star. So you compose it, you get a map from F star to R star, and because your chi bar is taking values in F star, you compose it with this map, you get chi R. So this is like the obvious lift of your residual character. Now suppose chi is a lift of chi bar, then chi is also a lift, and chi bar is also chi is also a lift of chi bar. Chi R is also a lift of chi bar. So if you see the character chi times chi R inverse, you're going to get a character chi prime, which is a lift of the trivial character, the character which sends everything to 1. So we write it, so we can write chi as chi primes times chi R. So we know chi R very well. So all we have to do is study what this chi prime could be. So this chi prime is a lift of the trivial character, as I said, right? Because chi and chi R both are lifting the same residual character. So chi prime takes values in 1 plus MR. MR is the maximal ideal of R. And because chi prime is reducing to 1 modulo MR, it takes values in 1 plus MR. And that's a Propy group. It's an abelian Propy group because R is a CNLWF algebra. So what this means, as we said, that chi prime will factor through GP because it's taking values in a Propy group, and the Propy group is abelian, so it will factor through the abelianization, the continuous abelianization of GP, which is GPF. So chi prime factors through GPF. So we get a character chi double prime from GPF to 1 plus MR. Now a character like this, which is continuous, so it will give you a morphism. This character will extend to a continuous morphism from the completed group ring to R. It's like the usual property of group rings, but we are only applying it to the completed group rings. That whenever you have a character from a group to some ring, then you can extend it to a ring homomorphism from the group ring to that ring. It's the same thing here, but we are doing it for completed group rings and with the same logic. So basically this chi double prime, it will extend to a morphism F chi, which is from WF GPR to R. So if you combine all this, we get that chi is basically f chi of chi naught eta naught, right? Because this chi double prime is extending to a morphism of rings from f chi to from completed group ring to R. And so what is happening? So if you take an element G of GPF and you denote by bracket G its element in the completed group ring, f chi of bracket G is actually chi double prime of G, right? So when you compose f chi with eta naught, what you're going to get is chi double prime. And chi naught is a Teichmüller lift, so f chi is just going to take chi naught to chi R. So therefore, when you take this f chi composed with chi naught eta naught, you get chi. So basically, given any lift, you are getting a morphism which is unique because chi double prime is unique, and such that f chi of chi naught eta naught is chi. So by universal property, this ring along with chi naught eta naught is the universal deformation ring of chi bar. So this is really following your nose here. I mean, we are not doing anything much deeper. All you have to remember is that there is always this Teichmüller lift, which will sort of make things easy for us. Okay, so you can, as I said, you can just last two steps, if they're too quick for you, you can just write down and verify. It's fairly straightforward. So for characters, we actually know how the deformation ring and the universal deformation looks like. So let's try to see how these rings looks like in some of the cases that we know, some quotients of Galois group. So for example, if you take Galois group GQ P infinity, there's the Galois group of the maximal extension of Q and ramified outside P and infinity, then this GPAB is just ZP. You just use Kronecker-Weber theorem and you see that this GPAB is just ZP. And so the universal deformation ring is just the Iwasawa algebra, where the power series ring in one variable over ZP. And okay, you want to make things a bit more complicated, you can just add, suppose L is a prime such that P divides L minus 1 and P power E is the highest power of P dividing L minus 1. And you look at G is equal to GQ P comma L comma infinity, then GPAB is ZP cross Z mod P power E Z. And the universal deformation ring, again, computing is just the power series ring in two variables, modulo the relation 1 plus x power P power E minus 1. It is coming from Z mod P power E Z. So when you write the completed group ring, this P power E torsion is going to give you this relation. And more generally, if S is a finite set of primes of Q, G is equal to GQS, then again GPAB is ZP times I goes from 1 to n Z mod P power EI Z. Okay, this P power torsion part may or may not come, we don't know. So for n greater, that's why I said for some n greater than or equal to 0, if n is 0, there is no P torsion part. And then the universal deformation ring is just ZPT comma x1 up to xn, and you go modulo the relation 1 plus x1 power P power E1 minus 1, 1 plus x2 power P power E2 minus 1, so on, to 1 plus xn power P power En minus 1. So at least in the case when G is some GQS, we know exactly how this ring looks like. For general number fields, it's a bit tricky. You need to know Leopold and those things. But if we know Leopold, and then we also know how these rings look like.
Yes. Can I interrupt, Shane? So do we know when these finite parts can occur, or at least sufficient conditions for them not to occur?
Yeah. So in this case, it is like if S has no prime P, which is 1 mod P, then there is no torsion part occurring, right? So this will only occur when S contains some prime, which is 1 modulo P.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just our Kronecker-Weber, you can say.
Yeah, thanks. Go.
Yeah, so as I said, if S does not contain any prime which is 1 mod P, then there's no torsion part. So it's just a power series ring in one variable. So this was a very easy case. You could do everything by hand because we were dealing with characters. So we had to go to abelian groups and everything was easy. But from the dimension 2 onwards, things are not so straightforward. But we would still like to know what the structure of this deformation ring can be. So that's what we are going to go next and see what we can say more about this structure, in a general case. So For that, we denote the maximal ideal of R rho bar univ by mathfrak M, and let R be the dimension of the F dimension of M modulo P comma M square. So as you can see, this is a F vector space. So the dimension is well defined, and this is same as the dimension of the homomorphisms of M modulo P comma M square to F. This second, it will be clear in a moment why I wrote this second equality. So if we say this is R, then we have this exact sequence from so because R is like the tangent space dimension of R rho bar univ, not exactly because we are going modulo P, but that's fine. So we have this exact sequence. So basically we have a surjective map from a power series ring over WFF in R variables to R rho bar univ, because R is the dimension of M modulo P comma M square, and we denote the kernel by I, which gives us this exact sequence. Now to determine the exact expecture, we need to know what R can be, first of all, how many variables, and we need to know what I should be, what is like as explicit description of I that we can get. It could be 0, it could be non-zero. We don't know. You'd like to know how it looks like. Now, and I should note that this R is like the least number of variables that you need to subject onto R rho bar univ. You cannot have less than R variables. That map won't be surjective because the tangent space dimension of R rho bar univ is greater than that. So this is like you can say this is like the optimal setting where we are in. You cannot make number of variables less than R. So we would like to know what this R can be and what this I, how would this I look like. Okay, so this is the next point, and the answer will come from Galois cohomology. So far we did not involve any Galois cohomology groups, but now not Galois cohomology, the group cohomology groups. But yeah, when we specialize G to some Galois group, we get Galois cohomology group. So the first observation is that we'll start by determining R. So for that, the first observation is that the homomorphisms, if you look at linear homomorphisms from M modulo P comma M square to F, they are same as your ring homomorphisms R rho bar univ to F epsilon. So F epsilon is the ring of dual numbers, which is Fx modulo X square. And because of the universal property of R rho bar univ, this is same as D rho bar of F epsilon. So this set of homomorphisms is same as the deformation, the set of deformations from of rho bar to F epsilon. Okay, so that's why we had this second inequality in the second line above, that hom of F M comma P M square is same as the dimension of hom F of M comma P M square to F. Okay, so this amounts to studying what deformations of rho bar are to F epsilon. If you want to determine the dimension of this set, we should determine the dimension of the set of deformations to D rho bar of F epsilon. So basically this equality is giving a vector space structure to D rho bar F epsilon. So whenever you have two deformations, you just add their epsilon part, you get another deformation. That is the vector space structure. I mean, you can also get the same vector space structure by using functorial properties of D rho bar, but everything is the same. So we will just suppress that and keep in mind that D rho bar F epsilon is a vector space, and the addition is given by just adding the epsilon parts of two deformations. Okay. So now we will compute the dimension of this D rho bar F epsilon. So we will study first the deformations of rho bar to F epsilon. So for that, we need some more notation. So G acts on these n by n matrices by conjugation by rho. So the action of G on M, which on a matrix M, is given by rho of G times M times rho of G inverse. So because rho is taking values with GLN of F, GLN of F acts on M of F by conjugation, right? You conjugate a matrix by an invertible matrix, you get another n by n matrix. So because we have a representation of G, we get an action of G on Mn of F by conjugation this way. And this is called the adjoint representation of rho, and we call it by, we denote it by add rho. It's a standard notation. Now, why did I introduce this notation? It will be clear in a moment. So suppose rho is a set theoretic lift. Okay, we are not saying it's a representation. It just take a set theoretic lift. Some lift, so that when you reduce it modulo epsilon, you get f. It's just a set theoretic lift. So there exists a function f rho from g to mn of f. So that rho of g looks like 1 plus epsilon f rho of g times rho bar of g, right? Because f is inside f epsilon, this rho bar of g makes sense, right? You can multiply by matrices in f with matrices in f epsilon. So this makes sense. So right now this rho is just a set theoretical lift. It's not a representation yet. Now such a lift is a representation if and only if this rho of g prime is rho of g times rho of g prime for all g and g prime in g. This condition is satisfied. Now this condition is satisfied for all g comma g prime in g if and only if this condition is satisfied on f rho, which is given by f rho g prime is f rho of g plus rho bar g times f rho bar g prime times rho bar g inverse for all g prime in g. You just write this instead of rho of g prime, you just substitute the 1 plus epsilon f rho of g prime times rho bar of g prime, and you do similarly for rho of g and rho of g prime, and you immediately get this equality. You don't have to do anything. So you get that this is a representation if and only if f rho satisfies this condition, and this is a familiar condition. It means that f rho is a one cocycle which takes values in at rho bar, sorry. So rho is a representation if and only if f rho is a one cocycle taking values in at rho bar. So what we have determined is that every lift of rho bar corresponds to a one cocycle. So one cocycle will give you a lift as a representation now, and a lift as a representation will give you one cocycle. And we say that two lifts are equivalent if there is some matrix M in Mn of F such that identity plus epsilon M times rho times identity minus epsilon of M is rho prime. Right? This is our definition of equivalence. They are equivalent by a matrix which is identity modulo the maximal ideal. Here it is just epsilon. So if you just unravel this, you get that if rho and rho prime are equivalent, then f rho prime of g is f rho of g plus m minus rho bar of g m rho bar g inverse, which means that f rho and f rho prime differ by a co-boundary. So if rho and rho prime are equivalent, then f rho and f rho prime differ by a co-boundary. On the other hand, if f rho and f rho prime differ by a co-boundary, a relation that I just wrote above, it holds for some matrix M or some matrix N, and then you can just backtrack calculation, and so basically they differ by a co-boundary. That means that there is an N such that f rho of g minus f rho prime of g is rho bar g and rho bar inverse, rho bar g inverse minus N. And as I said, you can just backtrack the calculation, and you get that identity plus epsilon n times rho times identity minus epsilon n is rho prime, which means rho and rho prime are equivalent. So we proved that if rho and rho prime are equivalent, f rho and f rho prime, they just differ by a co-boundary. And on the other hand, if they differ by a co-boundary, we can give a matrix which will take rho to rho prime. So which means that we got an isomorphism of f vector spaces between d rho bar f epsilon and h1g at rho bar. We already know what this number of variables look like. They just, that is just the dimension of h1 of g at rho bar over f. And so R is just dimension of h1g at rho bar over f, and this is finite because g is satisfying the finiteness condition. So this is a rather nice and straightforward calculation that you only have to just play with matrices and you get it. So now the question comes, what is the I, right? So maybe let me take a moment to just go back to the previous slide, or the slide before that, sorry. Yeah, so we have this exact sequence 0 to I to the power series ring over WF in R variables to R over univ. And we determined what this R is. It is the dimension of H1 of G comma add rho bar over F. Now we want to know what this I is. So if you look at I carefully, it is kind of giving the obstruction of lifting a representation. Let me say it out more explicitly. Suppose you have a map from R to S. R and S are to some CNL WF algebras, and you have a map from R to S. Suppose you have a lift of rho bar to S, and you want to know if you can lift it over you can take a lift of this to R, right? And because of the universal property of deformation ring, a lift to S is giving you a homomorphism from R rho bar univ to S. And you want to know if you can lift this homomorphism to R or not. You know, can you get a homomorphism from R rho bar univ to R so that the diagram, the triangle commutes. Now, if your R rho bar univ is just a power series ring, then obviously you can just lift this homomorphism, right? There are no restrictions on maps of power series ring. So if your I is 0, you know that you can always lift the homomorphism, which means that you can always lift the lift to R. But if the I is not 0, you know, if I is non-zero, then there might be some restrictions. We don't know what kind of relations R rho bar univ is having, and we don't know what kind of restriction this map from R to S is having. So, you know, we cannot guarantee that we can always lift something to R. So that is sort of the obstruction that is there, you know, and that is given by I. So basically, I is sort of giving you the obstruction of lifting a lift of rho bar to S to a lift of rho bar to R. So that is the idea. You know, we have to think of I as in terms of relations that are giving some obstructions. So we are going to use this point of view to determine some information about I. Okay, so keep this in mind that I is sort of telling you that lifting a lift, what kind of obstructions we have when you try to lift a lift over a morphism, a deformation over a morphism. Okay, so for that, we change the notation a bit. You know, we call this power series ring in R variables as R and denote maximal ideal by MR because we are going to use these rings a lot. So it's easier with this notation. So we had this exact sequence. Okay, I think I've made a typo here. It should be, the J should be I actually. Sorry, I made a typo. I will correct it later. So the exact sequence above gives an exact sequence of, it should be I modulo MRI to R modulo MRI to R rho bar univ to 0. So we are just going modulo MRI for that exact sequence. But since it is written J, I'm going to just say it out J, but keep in mind that it is I. Sorry for the typo. So if gamma, you know, you take a set theoretic lift of rho universal to GLN of R modulo MRJ, right? You just take a, so as I said, this J or we're just going to call it J from now. This J is sort of measuring the obstruction that you have, you know, in lifting a deformation. So for that, you know, just to make this precise, what we do is we take a set theoretic lift of rho univ, the universal deformation, to GLN of R modulo MRJ. So it's just a lift, which is like a set theoretic lift. And then it's easy to verify that a function D from G cross G to Mn of J modulo MRJ, which is same as add rho bar tensor J modulo MRJ because you're killing by MR. So you're going to F essentially, which is given by D of G1, G2, which is gamma of G1, G2 times gamma G2 inverse times gamma G1 inverse minus identity. So this is sort of measuring how far gamma is from being a homomorphism, you know, from being an actual representation. It's just a set theoretic lift. And this D is measuring how far it is from becoming an actual lift as a representation. So it is easy to verify that this D is actually a 2 co-cycle with values in add rho bar tensor J modulo MRJ. So it's a check that you can just do it by hand. So we have a 2 co-cycle. So every set theoretic lift of the universal deformation is giving you a 2 co-cycle. If you change gamma by a different lift, the co-cycle changes by a co-boundary. So the only change you're making is by a co-boundary. So therefore, we are getting a cohomology class, which we denote by O rho univ, O for obstruction, which takes values in H2 of G add rho bar tensor J modulo MRJ. So basically this, taking this set theoretic lifts, we are getting this well-defined cohomology class, which you call O rho univ. Now, we consider an F linear map from homomorphisms of from J modulo MRJ to F to H2 of G comma add rho bar, which takes phi of F to 1 tensor F of O rho univ. So O rho univ is taking values in H2 of G comma add rho bar tensor J modulo MRJ. So when you apply F, because F is a homomorphism from J modulo MRJ to F, this is indeed going to take values in H2 of G comma add rho bar. Suppose H is not, phi is not injective and let F be in kernel phi. So we can take R prime to be the quotient of R by kernel of F, and I to be the quotient of J modulo MRJ by kernel of F. So again, the notation problem is there. Anyway, bear with me. So here the I is isomorphic to F, and so we get an exact sequence 0 to I to R prime to R rho bar unif to 0. Right, because we are just going modulo kernel of F, and the image of F is F, so therefore find the residue field. So you have I is isomorphic to the residue field, and so we have this exact sequence 0 to R prime to R rho bar unif, and you denote this map R prime to R rho bar unif by psi2. Because F is in kernel F is in kernel phi, the obstruction of lifting rho unif to R prime vanishes. I mean, you take any set theoretic lift, what you're going to get is a representation. What you're going to get will become a representation after changing it by a suitable coboundary, because that's how our F is defined. You know, F is sort of making this obstruction vanish. So whenever you do have a set theoretic lift of R rho bar unif to R prime. It looks like I have a question in the chat. Oh, so F is an element of Hom J comma MRJ to F. So F is in kernel phi. So it's in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's too many notations here. So sorry about that. But yeah. So the point of this F is that because F is in kernel phi, this obstruction is vanishing. You know, when you choose a set theoretic lift and you create that rho unif as you created before, it is going to be the image of your original obstruction class under F, and because F is taking it to 0, this obstruction is going to vanish, which means you have a lift of this rho unif to R prime. You know, so you have constructed a deformation of rho bar to R prime. Yeah, so hence there is a deformation rho prime of rho bar to R prime, and rho prime also lifts rho unif, right? So I mean, when you go modulo I, from rho prime you get rho unif. So because of your because rho prime is a deformation, a universal property gives us a homomorphism psi1 from R unif rho bar to R prime. Now, when you apply psi2 to this, you get your rho unif back, right? Because applying psi2 is going modulo I, and going modulo I is giving you rho unif. You know, that's how rho prime is constructed. So psi2 of psi1 of rho unif is rho unif. So psi2 of psi1 is a map from R rho bar unif to R rho bar unif, which is giving you rho unif. So universal property says that psi2 of psi1 is identity. So the exact sequence that we have above, it splits. So basically this existence of rho prime tells that this exact sequence 0 to I to R prime to R unif rho bar to 0, it splits. Okay. And this kernel of psi2 is inside P comma MR prime square. MR prime is the maximum radial of maximum radial of R prime. And psi2 of psi1 is identity. So psi1 will induce a isomorphism on mod P tangent spaces of R rho bar unif and R prime, which means psi1 is surjective. Now, whenever you have a map between CNLWF algebras, which is isomorphism on mod P tangent spaces, it will be surjective, you know, because all the generators are in the image and therefore everything is in the image because of continuity. So psi1 is surjective, psi2 of psi1 is identity, so psi2 is injective. So this contradicts the fact that kernel of psi2 is I, which is isomorphic to F, which is not 0, right? Because psi2 was, in fact, the way we constructed, we know that the kernel was non-zero. But because of this splitting, we get that the kernel is actually 0. So this is kind of, so basically the basic idea behind this proof is that, you know, you're getting a deformation of rho bar to a ring which is bigger than R rho bar unif, you know, which cannot really happen unless it's like some trivial deformation, which it is not. So therefore that is the contradiction. You know, that's what we are saying here, that we get a lift, you know, which is not a lift in obvious way. You know, it's not like you're just attaching a variable to your universal deformation ring and you're just keeping the same universal deformation. It's not that kind of a lift. It's actually a non-trivial lift of a universal deformation ring to a bigger ring, which cannot happen. So this is a contradiction. So your map phi is injective. So the map phi was from J modulo MRJ to F. No, sorry, was it? Yeah. Yeah, so the map phi was from Hom F J modulo MRJF to H2 of G comma add rho bar. So we proved that this map is injective, which means that dimension of Hom F from J modulo MRJF is less than or equal to the dimension of H2 of G comma add rho bar. So by Nakayama lemma, we see that minimal number of generators of J is at most the dimension of the H2 of G comma add rho bar. I have one more question. Right, so this the remark says that this is reminiscent of the number of generators H1 G comma FP and relations H2 G comma FP of a pro-P group G. Is there something like Golod-Shaffer-Wheat inequality? Yeah, you're right that this looks like the H1 is generators and H2 is relations for pro-P group. It is exactly, you can think of it like an extension. And in fact, when you go to the deformation ring of the character, that is precisely that's what you get. Like the generators is H1G and the relations are H2G. I'm not aware of any Golod-Shaffer-Wheat like inequality for deformations of Galois representations. I haven't seen it anywhere, so I'm going to say there is none, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to check. Okay, so summarizing this rather long discussion. Yeah, so if R is the dimension of H1 of add rho bar, S is the dimension of H2 of G comma add rho bar, then we have this we have a presentation of R rho bar univ from power series rings in R variable over WF. The kernel is J, and the number of minimal generators of J is at most S. So okay, so for in any case, we have gotten some nice description of like the power series ring whose quotient R rho bar univ will be, and we also know that the ideal, how big the ideal could be, how big in the sense that how many generators it could have and so on. However, I mean, of course, this is not enough because we haven't really gotten the nature of J exactly, right? We don't know how this J precisely looks like, but already this information can give us some nice information about the deformation ring. So for example, if rho bar from GQS to GL2F is an odd representation, so S is a finite set of primes and GQS is the Galois group of the maximal extension of Q1 ramified outside S, then the global Euler characteristic formula tells us that the difference between dimensions of H1 and H2 is 3, because add rho bar is 4-dimensional, and because rho bar is odd, you can just this is a very basic calculation using the global Euler characteristic formula. So it is telling us that the difference between R and S is 3. So therefore, the crude dimension of R rho bar univ is at least 4 if rho bar is odd. That is already some non-trivial information that we are getting from this theorem. Okay, because we are going, like, we have a power series ring in R variables, and we are going modulo at most R minus 3 relations. So this is just generalization of Krull's principal ideal theorem. If rho bar is even, the same difference becomes 1, and then we get that the Krull dimension of R rho bar univ is at least 1. So I think it's a conjecture of Mazur that if rho bar is odd, then the Krull dimension of R rho bar univ is exactly 4. It has been proven by Boekle in some cases. And this is not known in general, but it's known in many cases and expected to be true. That the dimension is not at least 4, but it is exactly 4. Which will tell us that R rho bar univ is also a local complete intersection ring, which is nice ring to have. It's not a crazy ring. We say that rho bar is unobstructed if H2 of G add rho bar is 0. If H2 of G add rho bar is 0, that means S is 0, which means J is 0. And your universal deformation ring is just a power series ring. And if such a nice situation occurs, we say that rho bar is unobstructed. Because there is no obstruction to lifting. Whenever you have a map from R to S, your deformation of rho bar to S, you can just lift it to a deformation to R, because your universal deformation ring is a power series ring. So you can lift homomorphisms from the power series ring to S to homomorphisms to R. Therefore, you can also lift deformations. I said if rho bar is unobstructed, the universal deformation ring is a power series ring. So a natural question to ask is, okay, this is great, but does this occur in nature? Does this happen in practice for the cases we are interested in? So we already saw an unobstructed problem for characters, right? We said that if chi bar is a character of GQS and S does not contain any prime, which is 1 mod P, then the universal deformation ring is just power series ring in one variable. So that's the first example of unobstructed deformation, unobstructed representation that we got. Now I will give you some examples which Mazur gave in his paper on deformation theory. And for that, he calls them neat S3 representations. So we are going to be now a bit explicit from now on. So let f of x be a cubic polynomial x cubed plus ax plus 1. And it's a polynomial such that 27 plus 4a cubed is a prime p. So this is negative of discriminant. So we want the discriminant to be minus of a prime. And some examples of such primes are 23, 31, 59, 283. You put a is equal to -1, you get 23, a is equal to 1, you get 34, a is equal to 2, you get 59, a is equal to 4, you get 283. So, okay, there are also more primes like this. So you take f of x to be this polynomial, nice polynomial x cubed plus ax plus 1, such that 27 plus 4a cubed is a prime, call it P. Let L be the splitting field of f of x over q. Because the discriminant is minus p, the q root minus p is inside L. So L is a totally complex extension of q, and the Galois group is S3, we denote it by G0. So the simplest group that you can imagine, non-abelian, I mean. So the extension is unramified outside P and infinity. Okay, so we have this nice extension, and now we use this extension to get a representation. Now we can fix an embedding I from Galois L over Q to GL to FP. So we have this usual representation of S3, two-dimensional representation of S3, right? So S3 acts on FP, like the three-dimensional vector space over FP, fix a basis, and S3 will permute the coordinates. That's the usual three-dimensional representation of S3. It will split as a trivial representation and a two-dimensional representation. The two-dimensional representation will be given by a vector subspace whose coordinates sum to 0. So that will give us an embedding of Galois L over Q to GL2 of FP. And we let rho bar to be the representation of GQP infinity, P comma infinity to GL to FP, which is obtained by composing this surjective map GQP comma infinity to Galois L over Q with this I. Okay, so it's a very nice looking representation, and everything is very nice. And we call such rho bar a neat S3 representation. Okay, I think Mazur calls it special S3 representation, but there is also a notion of neat that he introduces, and then he proves S3 is neat. So I'm not going to go into so I'm just going to call it neat. But in his paper, I think he calls it as a special S3 representation. Okay, so the theorem is that if rho bar from GQP infinity to GL to FP is such a neat S3 representation, then the universal deformation ring is just power series ring in 3 variables. So this is already giving you a class of representations which are unobstructed. Okay, I still have some time, so I can just quickly give some proof of this. It's very easy actually. This is a proof that you can write it by hand. It's not hard at all. So it's a good to get our hands dirty sometime. So basically, the global Euler characteristic formula says that all we need to prove is that H1 of ad rho bar has dimension 3. This is all it suffices to prove. And as a G0 representation, this ad rho bar splits as 1 plus epsilon plus rho bar prime. Rho bar prime is this two-dimensional representation I just described of S3. And epsilon is just the sign representation, and 1 is the trivial representation. Yeah, I have a question here. Why is all primes not equal to P unramified in L? I think that's just a standard exercise, because your discriminant is a prime. You're not going to get any ramification at the other primes. So it's, I think, just a standard exercise in basic number theory. I hope that, yeah, okay, that answered the question. So basically, this ad rho bar is self-dual. The dual of ad rho bar is itself. Again, this is a very easy calculation to do, that ad rho bar is actually 1 plus epsilon plus rho bar prime. So epsilon, as I said, is the one-dimensional sign representation that factors through the 2 quotient of S3. Now inflation restriction, because this G naught, it has characters, it has cardinality 6, it is not divisible by our prime. Our primes are very high. So therefore, we can use inflation restriction to conclude that this H1 GQP comma infinity at rho bar, it is actually isomorphic to H1 GL comma S prime at rho bar fixed by G naught, where S prime is the set of L which lie above P comma infinity, and G naught is the Galois group of L over Q. The inflation restriction just says that we need to compute the dimension of H1 of GLS prime comma at rho bar, which is fixed by G naught. There is an action of G naught on this, and the subspace which is fixed by this has dimension 3. And GLS prime is actually acts trivially on at rho bar, and at rho bar is self-dual. So this H1 GL comma S prime at rho bar, which is fixed by G naught, it is same as G naught homomorphisms from Hom GL comma S prime FP to at rho bar. So basically this Hom GL comma S prime to FP, the vector space of all homomorphisms from GL comma S prime to FP, it has an action of G naught. It becomes a G naught representation, and we need to know what is the dimension of the homomorphisms from this representation to at rho bar. And this Hom GL comma S prime to FP, this can be calculated using class field theory. And for that, Mazur first observes that the class number of L is not divisible by P. So the trickiest part of this calculation is gone. So by class field theory, we have this exact sequence of FP G naught modules, which takes, so we have this surjection from OLP star modulo OLP star power P. So this matchfrac P is a prime dividing P, and OLP, so LP, L matchfrac P is completion of L at matchfrac P. OL matchfrac P is the ring of integers in it. So that's the notation that I just did a shorthand. So by class field theory, we know that we have a surjection from this product group to GLS prime abelian P. That's the abelian, pro-P abelianization of GLS prime. So we have this exact sequence. And so the surjective map, the kernel of it is given by OL star modulo OL star power P, the image of that. Okay, it need not be injective. So there is no 0 on the left yet. Okay, so this is just your basic class field theory. And Mazur actually proves that this first map is injective. So he proves that a global unit is not a P power in local units in a sense. So therefore, because the map of sequence is injective, and we also know that this L matchfrac P star, it does not contain any non-trivial pth root of unity. So therefore, we can just do a straightforward calculation to show that this OL star modulo OL star P is just rho bar prime. Rho bar prime is the 2-dimensional representation of S3. This just comes from Dirichlet's unit theorem, by the way. And this product group, it is giving us the representation 1 direct sum epsilon direct sum rho bar prime power 2. Okay, there are. Oh yeah, Mahesh is asking how does he prove that? Yeah, so such statement is tricky, but because we know it's the splitting field of polynomial, and he knows how the polynomial factors modulo P, so he just does it by hand. So to prove the first map is injective, he literally does it by hand, because the root is actually a global unit. We are taking xq plus ax plus 1, so a root of that is a global unit. You know how the polynomial factors, so he just by brute force he shows it. It's like a half a page calculation. Yeah, that's why this example is very, very easy and nice. Okay, so we know how this OL star modulo OL star P looks like as a S3 representation. We know how this product group looks like an S3 representation. This is injective. So we know how this GLS prime FP modulo GLS prime FP power P looks like as an S3 representation. So we just combine all this and we compute the dimension of this homomorphism from Hom GL comma S prime F to FP to at rho bar to be 3. So basically you combine all this and you get that as a S3 representation, this GLS prime FP to modulo GLS prime FP power P, it is just 1 plus epsilon plus rho bar prime, which is same as at rho bar. So the number of homomorphisms are just like, it has dimension 3. So this is how you just prove it. You just do brutal calculations and you prove it. But this is not, I mean, it could be done because it was such a very small extension and everything was so explicit. In general, this is a bit hard. You have a question? Yeah, I think you're right. That L is probably can be called p-rational number. He doesn't call it, but yeah, I think this is right. Okay, so we have produced a wide array of, okay, not as wide as we may like, but okay, somewhat wide array of representations. So one nice thing to notice is that if P is 23 and rho bar is the neat representation from GQ23 infinity to GL2 of F23, the neat S3 representation coming from the splitting field of the polynomial x cube minus x plus 1. And this is actually the reduction of the Galois representation attached to delta modulo 23. So rho bar is actually the reduction of the 23-adic Galois representation from GQ23 infinity to GL2Z23, which is attached to delta modulo 23. So this corresponds to this famous congruence of tau modulo 23. And I guess there is also a weight one form of level gamma 1 of 23, which is giving this representation. So already, we are looking at a form. Geneviève's notes on his web page, and he also gives an example coming from elliptic curves. So let E be the elliptic curve given by y squared plus xy plus y is x cubed minus x squared minus x. And he checks that it has good reduction outside 17. He lets S be 5, 17, and infinity, and rho bar from GQS to GL to F5 be the representation arising from the action of GQS on E5. And he proves that this rho bar is surjective and it's also unobstructed. So basically the universal deformation ring of this rho bar is also a power series ring in 3 variables. So he does some actual calculations by hand. You have to, for calculating H2, he sort of sees what contribution comes from every prime and then what contribution remains. And the remaining contribution becomes 0 because some class group vanishes. The class group of extension of Q obtained by attaching 5 torsion points. And that's how he proves that this is unobstructed. There's a general theorem of Flack, which tells us when a rho bar coming from elliptic curves is unobstructed, which I will now state. So suppose E be an elliptic curve over Q. Okay, I have one more question here. Yeah, I'm referring to Gaetan Chenevier. Yeah. So he gave a lecture series on infinite Fern in Paris, I think in 2010, and the notes are available on his webpage. And in one of the lecture notes, I found this example. So suppose E is an elliptic curve over Q, P greater than or equal to 5, and E has a good reduction at P. And let S be the set of primes at which E has bad reduction, and we include P and infinity. And let rho P bar be the representation from GQS to GL to FP, which is given by the action of GQS on P torsion points of E. One more question here. Oh, can this explicit example of unobstructed deformation rings be generalized for families of elliptic curves or Hida families? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean by this question, because this is I don't know what it means for a family of a Hida family to be unobstructed. For families of elliptic curves, I'm not sure if you can really extend it, because a parameter change might harm, some class group might come into picture if you change parameter. But if a family of elliptic curves is nice enough, maybe. And there is some result of Boston-Ulam, but I don't remember it precisely. But yeah, let me state this result of Flack here. So the result of Flack is that we have this representation. We have E elliptic curve, P greater than or equal to 5. E has good reduction, and S is the set of primes that E has bad reduction, and P and infinity, and rho P bar is coming from the action of Galois group on P torsion points. Then Flack says proves the following. He has some hypothesis The first hypothesis is that rho p bar is surjective. The representation, which is over GL2FP, it is surjective. For every Q in S, which means for every prime of bad reduction, S0 of QQ of EP tensor EP is 0. So EP tensor EP is actually closely related to add rho bar. So therefore, this such condition comes up. And by QQ, I mean, we are restricting EP tensor EP to GQQ, the local Galois group at Q. And I want the fixed points to be 0. And okay, I'm almost out of time, so I'll just take a couple of minutes. P does not divide omega inverse times L times sim2E of comma 2. So omega is some transcendental period, and this L is the symmetric L function of E, and its special value at 2. So because we are dividing by omega inverse, you're going to get a non-zero rational number, and he assumes that P doesn't divide this. So if all these three conditions hold, then he proves that the universal deformation ring of rho p bar is a power series ring in 3 variables. So this is like this is a nice, I think the previous case can also be the example of Chenevier. It can also be concluded using this theorem. You don't have to do those explicit calculations. You can just use this theorem to conclude that, I believe. So it's a very nice thing. The L functions are involved somehow here, and the hypothesis is not, they all look reasonable. They are not that bad. And incidentally, I think Flack uses Euler systems to prove this. So this example sort of nicely ties my course. This theorem, sorry, nicely ties my lectures with the overall theme. There's elliptic curves and L values and everything. So this is the theorem of Flack, and it's not an easy proof. I mean, it's a deep theorem, so you need some nice background. And this was, I think, extended to modular forms by Diamond Flack duo. And just a small one remark before I stop today is that a similar result for CM elliptic curves has been proved by Boston Long. So this is sort of excluding the case CM, because he's assuming that the map is surjective, so he's sort of assuming things to be non-CM. But for CM elliptic curves also some similar result is proved by Boston Long. Okay, I have a question in the chats. Oh, that's a good question. That if the third hypothesis is not true, is the result incorrect? I'm not sure. I haven't read the proof of this theorem, so I'm not sure. But I think the third hypothesis. So he essentially proves some Selmer group is 0 using these hypotheses, and I'm not sure if the third hypothesis does not hold, then maybe you get some contribution from that Selmer group. So I would say that if the third hypothesis does not hold, then the conclusion is incorrect. But I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so this is like a more systematic theorem of Flack, which is telling you when a representation arising from elliptic curves can be unobstructed, and some explicit things that you can just check and conclude. So it's a nice theorem. So I'm going to stop here today. Next time we will see its analogs for modular forms. There are theorems like this proved for modular forms as well. Chanho says that this means the congruence ideal is non-trivial and deformation ring may be more complicated. Yeah, exactly. Yes, that is like, you can say that is like the philosophical reason why we need third hypothesis. Thanks for the answer. Okay, so I'm going to stop today. I've gone a bit over time, so sorry about that, but let me stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaunak, for this wonderful talk. Are there any questions? So I had a quick question, Shaunak, regarding this Flack's theorem. So what about those primes, for even in a non-CM elliptic curve, there are these finitely many primes for which this representation is not surjective.
Right.
Anything similar known for such things?
So, I mean, we first need to know that the representation is still irreducible, right? Otherwise, you cannot talk about deformation ring in Mesu's sense. Yeah, but then things can be tricky because I think then you have to there's no general result as such. You have to go case by case. That, if there is a representation where the map is not surjective, you have to check properly. And I think in second case, if that doesn't hold, then I think you get an obstruction for sure. I'm pretty sure about that. That if something like that doesn't happen in the second case, then I think you're going to get some kind of obstruction. So it's just all you do is you calculate the contribution coming from every prime, and then you calculate the other contribution coming from some class group. So the contribution coming from every prime is easy to compute. You just have to compute it. The contribution coming from P itself might be tricky, and for that you probably need the surjectivity, because otherwise the P can also contribute some non-trivial things. And then for the class group, you need this kind of L values statement, I think, because that is something that is beyond our control. You cannot really control those things. But as far as I know, there's no general statement, but you can compute it by hand, case by case, and see what happens.
Any other questions or comments?
Can you say a bit about the local? We don't consider the Galois, Q bar over Q, but consider the QP bar over QP. Is there any deformation theory for local theory?
Yeah, I mean, deformation theory is for any finite group, any profinite group which satisfies the condition phi p. And for local Galois groups, it does satisfy the condition phi p. So deformation theory is also there for representations of local groups. And there things are easier because you have this local Euler characteristic formula. So I guess it's probably easier to compute the dimensions of these Galois groups. But on the other hand, a complication can arise. If you are looking at a representation of global Galois group, it may not stay irreducible when you restrict it to the local Galois group. So that is the kind of, if you just want to focus on local groups, obviously there is a deformation theory and you can work on it. But if you want to sort of compare local and global deformation rings, you need to know that both representations are irreducible. The restriction to local group, you need it to be irreducible. Otherwise, the deformation ring in sense of Mazur is not defined. There are other ways of going around that, but what we are seeing that thing is not well defined.
So you are saying that we need to use the patching when we talk about the local global theory.
Yeah, patching, yes, and you also need to go to these frame deformations and those kind of things, because the restriction of a global representation to the local one could become irreducible, and to avoid that, you just go to frame deformations everywhere, and then you can talk about local and global rings, and you can compare them.
Indeed, I have a simple question for the local.
Yeah.
If we talk about the GL2, they say supercuspid representation.
Okay.
And then it seems that if you go to the GL2 FP, I don't know what the image is there.
Right.
So can we talk about the lifting for such kind of cases? Because the image is not clear, but there is that kind of image, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you don't know if the image is, if something is reducible or irreducible, and you don't know what the image is. Yeah. So yeah, for that you can either use pseudo representations or you can use frame deformations. If you really need lifts of representations, it's better to use the frame deformation rings, which exist for all representations.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? If not, let's thank Shaunak again.